Disapproving Porg is out, and if you're a longtime viewer of my channel, you know what that means. It's time for the OnePlus Nord N30 after a couple of weeks, and I could do a couple of weeks review because I did the Android police review of this particular phone. So I'll leave a link to that in the description. I'm going to reference it a little bit later on. So I've been living with this device for the better part of 3 weeks, but we'll call it 2 just to keep it on the safe side. This is very different from what I expected. It's a very complicated review to do. There's a lot to go over. It's not a bad phone by any means, especially when you start factoring in the price. When you factor in the fact that you could get this on T-Mobile for $264 or a few bucks a month, it becomes a great deal. I know Metro PCS will probably have this where it's free for a sign-up. I think actually T-Mobile right now, you can get it for free with a new line activation. That's going to be a different story. That's a different conversation. If you're somebody who already had a Nord N20, I'm going to do a direct comparison video of those two coming up, but there's no reason to upgrade to this. It is a completely different phone. This is not a successor to the N20 that we knew and loved last year. This is a completely different thing. This is a rebadged Nord CE3 Lite or whatever the heck that it is that they released overseas. So understand that when you start considering what you get here in this package. So there's two things going on here. One is the disappointment I have because it is so different from the N20 that I already knew and loved. And then the practical side of me that has to say, well, okay, in all reality, this is an under $300 device. What does it provide for that amount of money? And it's actually okay for that. And if you pick it up, you're going to enjoy it if you're aware of a few things. First thing we're going to go over is the display, and this is the biggest difference from last year. Last year, the N20 had the absolutely gorgeous OLED panel, near flagship level quality OLED display, and with it the in-display fingerprint sensor and all the rest of it, the always-on display stuff that came with that. LCD this year. A lot of people will jump up and down and say a display shouldn't exist if it doesn't have 120 or 90 hertz. Last year's OLED was 60 hertz. Well, guess what? You got yourself an LCD with 120 hertz. 120 hertz works well. For an LCD, okay, so there always has to be that kind of disclaimer. For an LCD, it's actually pretty good. Good colors, gets decently bright. You're not going to have a lot of issue in bright sunlight seeing this or seeing this outdoors. Good color. Of all the LCD panels, especially in this price range, this is going to be one of the better ones, but it's a step down from an OLED. So that's why it has a little bit of an issue for me. Bigger display this year. 6.7-inch display as opposed to the 6.4, I believe it was, on the N20. You do notice that. It is a bigger device. It's not a heavier device. It is a little bit heavier, of course, by default, but it's not it's not crazily out of sorts here when it comes to the weight. The balance is still pretty good. It's a bigger device, but you can still manage it in your hand. One of the big downgrades from last year, and it is something that I noted in the Android police review, and I'm going to reference there for the pictures because I don't know if I could use that photo that I took of this. Whatever this material is here on the back, it's plastic. It's a plastic build. It wears so quickly. This scratches up. I had my review unit for 2 weeks, and it was absolutely scuffed beyond recognition here on the bottom. And the material here that they use, oh, it's so glossy. It's a fingerprint magnet, smudge magnet. You can see there's kind of this gray material that they use. Look, hairs on it. This gray material that you use around the cameras that they use to protect it rubs off almost immediately. This back looks cheap in a matter of days. Days. This will start looking horrible. And especially if you're like me and you keep your devices looking pretty good, throw a case on it immediately. You're going to want to do that. Performance is great still. Snapdragon 695 again, okay? So they're using the same chip from last year, but thankfully, since it's so good, the performance is holding up. Not only can it push that 120 hertz display and do it smoothly, but games still catch up fine on this. Call of Duty Mobile, you're playing on high settings, not medium settings, not low settings where you're just barely getting along with how many frames per second. You can play smoothly on high settings Call of Duty Mobile. Genshin Impact, you're going to play it on low, but at least it's going to be played. It's going to be nice. It's going to look good on this display. Pokemon Go, same thing. Takes advantage of the 120 hertz. Plus, this display is bright, colorful. Colors pop on it. Games are going to look good. And with the 695, gaming performance is actually pretty good. Let's talk about One UI. One UI. I wish it were One UI. I wish we were talking about One UI. Okay? That was a slip. Let's talk about Oxygen OS 13. Android 13. This is where it starts to fall a little bit short. Same as last year, but you kind of overlooked it because it punched so far above its weight that I didn't mind the software stuff last year. But this year with the competitors, even though they're more expensive, offering so much more support than this device, the Nord N30, it comes up a little short. One major upgrade of Android. It's on 13 right now, so that means it'll get 14. That's it. And 3 years of security updates. To me, that comes in a little short. In 2020, you could get away with it in 2022 for everything that you offered at $280. This year, I would have liked to have seen more support, especially when the chipset in here is good enough to handle it. The 695 is still fine. Give us that extra couple of years, or at least get us to Android 15, 16, Oxygen OS 15, and we'd be fine with that. I would have liked to have seen a little bit more software support, but unlike the problems that it had with Android 12, with Oxygen OS 12, the disaster that was, 13's pretty dialed in. 13 has limited issues. I didn't notice a lot of lag over my time using it. I didn't notice a lot of issues with it. I don't know what it's doing here, why it needs to do all this stuff. I didn't see a lot of the hiccups and the orientation stuff, the problems I had on Oxygen OS 12, the RAM management. It's got 8 gigs of RAM this year, so that was kind of helped a little bit. I didn't see the aggressive kind of closing that you get on a lot of the OnePlus devices when the RAM is a little bit less than you'd think, so that's something. So the performance, like I said, overall good. Software is a part of that package, and that's fine. Battery life, significantly different from last. The N20 could break 9 hours of screen on time without breaking a sweat. Just run through it. This is 6.5, 7 hours of screen on time. If you're careful, that's not bad. It's just disappointing because it's such a step down from the N20. You'd figure a successor would at least hold serve, maybe do a little bit better. This is a step down from that. You get the larger display. Perhaps it's the LCD. Perhaps it's an Oxygen OS 13 thing. I don't know, but it's less battery or worse battery life than you got last year. This fingerprint sensor, it works fine, but it's garbage. I hate when they're side mounted like this where you could just kind of touch it all the time. It's going to buzz. Turn haptics off, by the way. They're awful. This is the worst haptics on a device since the Nokia, I don't forget what it is. One of those cheap ones they had. It was terrible. It's a weird tinny vibration. It's loud. Turn the haptics off immediately. That reminded me of that when I false hit the fingerprint scanner. No in-display like I talked about because of the LCD. This one, it works fine, but the problem is it's flush with the frame. Completely flush with the plastic frame. If it were raised, my thumb could find it. But a lot of times, even with 2 or 3 weeks of use, my thumb could not quite understand where it was at any given time, so I'd get false hits. Unlocking it without looking at it is just not possible. It's disappointing. Not all bad news. There you go. You got it. 3.5 millimeter headphone jack, NFC, okay, which is important for a lot of people. Contactless payments, micro SD card, expandable slot, up to 1 terabyte. That's a huge deal for a lot of people. They added a speaker this year. It gets loud, 200% ultra something they call it. It gets loud, so it's stereo speakers this year. Camera, we'll talk about it. I'll throw up some shots. It has a tendency to blow out images. The 3 times lossless zoom is not what it's described. It's not a zoom lens. It kind of does it electronically and they bin stuff. Whatever it happens to be, it's not that great. The camera last year was a disaster. This year it's a little bit better, but get used to, when you're in the camera app, get used to, oh, I know. Ignore this stuff because I haven't used this device. I was using the promo device. This stuff, when you're starting to look at stuff to do, get used to doing the manual white balance. It's the only way that you're going to add depth to images because it has a tendency to blow out everything. So use the manual white balance and you'll be able to get some decent shots with it. But you're going to have, point and shoot's not really a thing. Point and shoot, some of the images are going to be soft. The shutter, it doesn't quite capture it, even though it's a fast enough shutter. It's still the processing or something. Some of the images come out blurry. It's not a fantastic camera. You're going to have some patience with it, but if you have patience with it and you work with it, you can get a decent shot in good lighting. Low lighting, night photography, look, understand what price range you're in. You're going to have issues with that. So that's something to keep in mind. Unless you're on a Pixel 6a or something like that, you're really not going to get great night photography in this price range. So keep your expectations in check. Like I said, $260-something, you could do a heck of a lot worse. It's capable. Performance alone, display and performance, save this, as we knock the camera off axis, save this at $260. I'm disappointed because of how awesome the N20 was. Absolutely fantastic the N20 was. And this is not a successor to that. It's something completely different. It's like Super Mario 2 when they gave us Doki Doki Adventure, whatever that was, and they rebadged it as Super Mario 2 because they thought it was too hard for us. The Japanese said that we couldn't handle the actual Super Mario 2. Same deal. It's good in its own right, not as good as the original, very different. That's how I would sum up the N20, Nord N30 rather. So I know a lot of people are looking forward to this. We're going to have a ton of comparison videos with this coming up. It's not what people expected. It's disappointing in a lot of ways. It still is really good in a lot of ways as well. So it's a lot more complex of a conversation than I believe it needed to be, since the N20 was such a slam dunk. This one should have been as well, but they kind of altered a lot of stuff. But we'll talk about it. Lots of videos coming up this week in comparisons on this. The A54, the 7A, the 6A from last year. We're going to have a bunch of the N20 for certain comparisons. But so stay tuned right here. If you've made it this far, like, comment, subscribe, all that fun stuff. Until next time, have that Steve-licious day.